Welcome back to the Creator Economy, a series all about the power of video in a world of creators. My name is Katie Martel. I'm so excited to be your host today in partnership with the fantastic team at Socialive. Now, today's episode is exciting to me because it really features the C-level creator, anyone who's part of the C-suite who has taken on the responsibility of creating on behalf of their organization. It could be internal, it could be external, but more executives than ever are stepping up to the plate, accepting that responsibility to not only be a thought leader in market, but to be an executive spokesperson on behalf of the organization. We know that when it's done right, it has tremendous business impact on everything from company culture to employee engagement, but also everything we need to drive, like sales, awareness, and even investor confidence. So I'm sure you can agree this is an amazing opportunity for anyone in the C-suite, but we've also seen it go south a few times. We all know and have seen those horror stories of C-suite execs not exactly prepared for camera. And I think today's episode is all about that. If you are somebody in the C-suite joining us, thank you for being here. And if you're somebody who works hard behind the scenes, we know there's a lot of people behind the scenes. We hope this episode gives you a lot of inspo, but also tactical help as well as we all navigate the world of creators. I'm really excited today to be joined by folks that represent, I think, what it really takes to be part of the creator economy. Things like empathy, right? Being more accessible to our audiences, making new connections with the power of video, and showing the humanity of our business. Now, these are essential leadership traits for the real world. They're also essential traits that my guest joined me today. Let me welcome my guest on air today. We're going to be joined today live by Amy Connery, founder of the Subscribed Institute at Zuora. Hey, Amy, welcome to the broadcast.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. I can't wait to dig into some of the amazing work that you're up to with the Subscribed Institute. We're also joined by birthday boy himself, Daniel Rodriguez, Chief Marketing Officer at Simpler. Hi, Daniel. Happy birthday. Let me be the first to wish you that today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
21 again. Now, we're also going to be joined live, but also pre-recorded with my guest, John Miller, Chief Marketing Officer at Demandbase. Him and I had a chance to connect in a pre-recorded interview that will play today. Again, the power of video, my friends. But we're so excited to have this C-suite lineup because this topic is one that I think every single organization faces, right? How do we leverage the insight and the talent on the C-suite? And how do we make the most of video? So thank you both for joining us here. I want to start right there, right at the beginning, with what the heck it means to be a C-suite creator, what the role of it is in a company, why we invest so much time and energy in doing this. And let's actually start with an answer from John Miller about the role that thought leadership played in the early days of Marketo. So let's hear from John first.
I mean, back in the early days of Marketo in like 2005, 2006, one of the things that I sort of declared when we were starting the company is that I really wanted us to be seen as thought leaders. And I actually started writing our blog at Marketo, before we even wrote our first line of code, for the product, which meant that by the time we actually launched and were in market, we had built a following, and an awareness of what we were doing. And I think that really helped Marketo and helped to kind of build our brand. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to kind of separate, I would say, content marketing in general from thought leadership specifically. I mean, they both can, accomplish a goal of building awareness about your brand, building perhaps even preference, for your business. But I think true thought leadership is somewhat rare. True thought leadership is about introducing ideas that require attention, that can really kind of change how people think. It's often takes things in a contrarian direction. Think of Seth Godin. Like he brings thought leadership to the table with kind of new ideas. So I think thought leadership should be educational and ideally provocative. But great content marketing can simply be fun or entertaining. So I'm not saying one's better than the other, but it is worth thinking about, the distinction. I think here in 2021, leading to 2022, video is increasingly a really critical component of both content marketing and thought leadership. I mean, as I alluded to back in the Marketo days, it was about the written word. I'd write a blog post. I'd write a definitive guide. even into Engagio, we wrote a lot. Whether it's, we've all gotten used to like watching Tiger King at home, or just people's attention spans are shorter, you name it. Video is clearly, becoming a very, well, always been important, but it's becoming, I think, a dominant way of kind of communication and content in B2B. I mean, at first, just talking about thought leadership, again, kind of bouncing back and forth between content and thought leadership. Like, true thought leadership takes time. It takes, honestly, a certain way of thinking. And I'm not going to say that not everybody can be a thought leader, because I have a hunch that if people work hard enough at it, most people could be, a thought leader, at least about something that they have a lot of interest and passion around. I think, one of my unique skills is I think, particularly good at synthesizing a lot of information and then teaching it, and explaining it. So for me, what, my thought leadership often is just education. It's kind of trying to explain to people how to do things, what are the best practices, all that kind of stuff. And so, I've had to really find time to sort of be able to do that. Honestly, it's early morning. For me, it's early mornings and weekends. Like, that kind of true thought leadership creation doesn't happen with an hour block, in the middle of the day. I think another thing that's been really valuable for me is, even though I like the writing process because it helps me to organize my thoughts, I'm not a fast writer. I'm very slow, in fact. And so be able to work with a great writer, for example, like Katie Martell, who we've done some amazing content together in the past, is just a force multiplier, because then I can just sort of more share the thoughts and get the thinking out, and then kind of have somebody put something together. Often it's really good. Sometimes just having a straw man to then work with, furthers my ability to kind of think through kind of the pieces.
Thank you to my panelists for listening to John. I was so happy to sit with him, because I think he's somebody who, as he said, started thought leadership before they even wrote code. I think it was an amazing part of how John Miller was able to build the Marketo brand, now the demand-based brand, and Engagio in between that. Amy, Daniel, I'm dying to hear how you've executed these high-level ideas of thought leadership in video. And Amy, I want to start with you. Tell us, anything you've got to respond to that John shared, but what it means to be a C-suite creator for you at Zuora.
Absolutely. So one of the things that John shared that really resonated was just really the early stage or early stages, really having that point of view. And that's something that actually attracted me to Zuora out of being an industry analyst, which I had done for many years. Our CEO wrote a book called Socialive that ended up being a New York Times bestseller. And in fact, it was something that a lot of executives read and then come to our company and say, gosh, I read this book. I'd really like to drill into the concepts of the book. And so what we then did as a next step was we launched a think tank called the Subscribed Institute. And it's really enabled us to have meaningful conversations with executives. So what is a think tank, you might ask? Well, there's three simple ingredients. One is you need to have an audience. And so this is the audience and the members of the Subscribed Institute. We have over 1,500 today. These are executives at companies that are aspirational or currently being very influential in the subscription economy. So companies with subscription models. We put on events. And so these are opportunities for these execs to talk with one another, also for those execs to hear from thought leaders. And then we do original research. We're a SaaS company, so we have lots and lots of benchmark data that we're able to share on an anonymous and aggregate basis. We also do some of our own research. And so I think having this point of view, having information that's really valuable to share has been part of our really platform from day one. And so last year, or maybe it was early this year, I'm kind of losing track of time in the vortex that we're all in. We said, you know what, we've actually got the ingredients of a documentary, and we really have a point of view of what we've seen companies experience during the last 18 months or so. And so that was something that we put together in New York in February of this year. And that's also been really a powerful way for us to tell a story.
It's really fantastic. Let's roll a short clip of that to see and bring it to life.
A lot of the changes that we've seen, these were initiatives, these were strategies that had been set into play before the pandemic hit.
There was a study by the Harris Poll that showed across international adults, 75% of them actually said they will buy less and less stuff going forward. But ownership is going away. The question is, what replaces it? What replaces it is this concept of usership.
Usership is the idea that you don't need to own a product or service in order to get value out of it. Less cars being sold and owned in the traditional sense, but miles driven way up. Less video game consoles being sold, but the amount of gamers is increased exponentially.
And we're seeing this play out in industry after industry after industry.
Whatever passion you have, there's probably a subscription for it.
Look, the subscription business model is one of the most consequential transformations of our time.
The opportunities on the other side are enormous.
That's awesome. Amy, I'm so excited to see that you were in a documentary here talking about a documentary. It's all very meta, but the film was fantastic because it incorporated your thought leadership in a really interesting packaged, almost infotainment-like way. The whole thing is worth watching, and it's short. It's like 20 minutes long. It's a great documentary. Tell us about what role that video played, that documentary itself, in your continued thought leadership efforts.
Absolutely. So we used that documentary to kick off a virtual customer conference that we held shortly after the video was produced. So typically in a conference like that, in the previous world, we'd have a live keynote, right, where someone would come in and maybe we'd have some pre-recorded video, but the majority of the story that we would tell would be that person on stage. And so, we realized in this world where people kind of get burnout, right, from all of the Zoom calls and all of the virtual events, that we really needed to grab people early on with something that was a little bit different than a talking head. And so that's where the idea of having this video, we brought in customers, we brought in our CEO who you saw. I was a part of that. We brought in some journalists as well. And like you said, our objective, and glad to hear that you felt this way, was to produce something that was really enjoyable to watch, that really felt like meaningful information, and really was the antithesis of simply a product pitch. And it was really something meaningful about the world that we're living in today and the struggles that we see companies facing.
Absolutely. And it really does come through in featuring both yourself, that was your CEO Teen on there. The C-suite is featured here, and y'all did fantastic. I'm going to talk more later on in the broadcast about some of your tips and tricks behind the scenes, both for yourself and the company. And before we do, I want to welcome Daniel. Daniel, thank you so much for being here. What did you think of Amy's example and what our guest John Miller shared?
Oh my gosh. I mean, doing something high production quality to keep people's attention. I love that example. I mean, we all kind of go to work and think it's just Zoom, and then we immediately probably don't go and watch Zooms at night. We probably go and watch a documentary on Netflix. So to take a page out of what people really want to be doing, spending their time, I love that. I'm a huge fan of John Miller. I've known him for years. And had him actually be the keynote years back at one of our own customer kickoffs. So it's great to kind of see the world go round here, and reflecting on what he said about finding somebody who you can collaborate with if you yourself are maybe not a great writer. I actually very much empathize with this, because Jason Fidler, who runs PR here at Simpler, and we actually worked together back at Seismic as well. It's this symbiotic relationship, it feels like, at this point, where we can sit down, he can pull an idea for a thought leadership piece out of me in a 30 to 45 minute conversation. He does a critical first draft. Anyone who takes pen to paper for the first time is the true winner in all of this creator economy stuff. Because I think that's the hardest part. I think it's the hardest part to actually kind of take the first crack at something. And then we can kind of iterate back and forth on something once it's down, but he does an amazing job of kind of synthesizing that stuff. So I love hearing that.
Oh yeah, and I promise I didn't pay John Miller for that shout out, but John and I had worked together in that exact role, and that's the beauty of being a C-suite creator. You don't have time, as John mentioned. You can't do it in the middle of the day. If you've got nights and weekends, great. But I give you both a ton of credit for making yourself available for this type of work, as we know it works. But it does not just happen, and really good thought leadership does take, as John mentioned, that contrarian thinking and time, and it's really important to have resources, and we'll get into that. But Danielle, first start us and tell us more about how else you are leveraging video as a channel, as a tool, as part of these larger thought leadership efforts. There's been some announcements and some launches just this week over at Simpler, which is a fantastic example.
That's right. We have just launched our first book, which is absolutely a thought leadership piece.
A soon-to-be bestseller.
Experience is everything. We can hope that it could be a bestseller, like the subscription economy book that Amy was referring to. And in many ways, I think this is following somewhat of a playbook, right? To create a category as a company, as a startup company, you need to have thought leadership. You need to be contrarian, and it's very helpful to be perceived as serious about that endeavor. And, we looked, and I was fortunate enough to actually be in the classroom, literally having Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah from HubSpot when I was in business school talking to us about writing their book and how important it was for them to write their book on inbound marketing as a way of organizing their thoughts, first and foremost, and substantiating and legitimizing their viewpoint on the market. And so that's very much, I think, what we've done here with this experience is everything. And then in order, in order to promote it, I think we want to be able to connect with people, right? And we want to do that on people's terms. And we're certainly going to be using all of the forms of content that we can, but video will be critical for that. So we're doing a couple things with video. One is that we are having a webinar series. We interviewed a lot of very experienced, thoughtful thought leaders themselves that are in the customer experience space as a part of writing this book. And we are going to have them on video, and we're going to have more conversations and pull more out from them, which is going to be a great series over the next couple months that we're going to be running. And then I want to, and we're going to see when this happens. It's going to be in Q1. I don't want to make any promises, but I want to create a LinkedIn Live series and have it be a dialogue, I think, between kind of two senior executive roles that we see within this body of work that we put together for the book. We see there's a tension that's kind of playing out between, and it's specifically, it's between the customer success leader and the brand leader, which is sometimes a general manager of a brand, or it could also be the CMO, particularly in retail organizations. And it's a healthy tension. It's a positive tension, but there's change and movement happening within organizations, and it's because of the way that customers exist has changed. So we've kind of seen this play out, and I want to host that, and I want to help pull some of those levers and have people talk about it.
Yeah, you're building a platform, right, for these conversations. It's a platform for that influence. I think that is such a cool way of leveraging live. Tell us more about this Upstream series, please.
Yeah, so we're really proud. I'm personally proud to just be able to be associated with what Trish Fontanella, who runs our community efforts here at Simpler. So we have a community that is not our customer community. It is a broad community for CX practitioners, so mentors, mentees, people to come together and learn. It's called CX Life, and we have a content series called Upstream. And Upstream is made so that we hear from a different set of voices. I don't think it's probably too much of a surprise for people to hear that the world of leadership in customer experience, which includes thought leadership as well as practitioners, is overly white and male. And we are in a position, and I'm so proud to be associated with Trish taking this leadership stance to say, let's change that. if we collectively recognize that that's an over-indexing and we want to change that, we need to do our part. And part of that means we need to hear from new people. We need to hear from different perspectives, and we need to give people, and this is part of why we're doing this too, is that the people who get promotions are the people who are seen as thought leaders and as people that are getting recognized with awards and getting recognized with speaking engagements, right? This kind of goes round and round. And there are people that are doing amazing things that have yet to have their first or second chance to show people what they're doing. And so we're trying to elevate those voices.
I love that. It really does take the first chance to start that momentum going. Kudos on that series. Kudos on the driver behind it. I'd love to ask any lessons learned along the way. I mean, this is a question about any thought leadership efforts with video, but tell me about anything you wished you knew. I mean, what have you learned in just creating these video series?
Well,
You're like,
there's a few things. There's a few things. One is that there is definitely like a measure twice, cut once here to deciding, hey, we want to do a series. How are we, who is our audience? What is our angle, right? And then there is also the don't measure 3 and 4 times. Like, you have to actually start. You have to go. You have to, the first episode is always going to be a little bit lumpier than the 10th episode. I mean, that's just kind of that's how things go. You get more used to producing it. You get the segments kind of figured out. The host gets more used to the flow. So allow there to be 10, and get going, start doing it. And then it will build from there. But I think there's sometimes a little bit too much, like, we got to get this thing perfect before the world has ever even seen one thing. And the reality is that people won't necessarily see the first thing, but they will see maybe the 15th or the 50th thing.
Right. And that old startup mantra that done is indeed better than perfect. It's kind of just the name of the game. Amy, I'd love to ask you the same question. I mean, the Subscribed Institute is a beautiful example of an internal think tank, a thought leadership factory inside of a company. I'd love to learn any lessons that you've experienced from founding this incredible asset for Zuora.
Absolutely. So, the first thing is that the Institute was founded really out of necessity, which is that we had a lot of information that we knew was going to be helpful for companies to understand as they were launching subscription businesses. And we're really mission driven. We believe in the world subscribed, whether you're a customer of Zuora or not. We want you to find success. But we couldn't talk to everybody at once. A one-to-one model wasn't going to work. And so the Subscribed Institute was really founded to scale a lot of that thought leadership and expertise that existed inside of our company. And since doing that in 2018, I've had really the pleasure of talking with lots of other folks in similar circumstances and helping them set up their think tanks, from the very beginning. And it's really grown to something that's a part of almost everything we do when we engage with companies. We have a strategy and advisory arm of the think tank now that works one-on-one with companies who oftentimes come in first because they're interested or see something through the think tank and then want to engage on a one-on-one basis. So it becomes a real big part of our pipeline motion, or it has become a big part of our pipeline motion. Another thing to really keep in mind as you're doing these types of thought leadership exercises or putting together a documentary is that the team behind the team is really what makes it all click. Every exec that you're going to put up in front of a camera, they have a point of view, but they're also super busy. And it takes more than having something to say and being really intelligent to create compelling video content that people are going to want to watch and where there's going to be a clear outcome that comes from that. So we have a whole team of folks that work on, if you take that documentary, it was scripted out. And we all had, Teen and myself and others, we had something to say and a part in developing the script, but it was really put together by a team that knew what it took to put on a polished looking presentation in a documentary type format. So that goes for any of the externally facing or even internally facing, frankly, video content or any other content that we produce. There's a big team of writers, of designers, videographers that are part of making it all look as good as it does.
Right. And even if the resourcing is maybe at a startup level budget, there's still a role to play, that writing, that scripting. Messaging doesn't always translate to an executive when the camera's on. You've got to script it in a way that is short and pithy and authentic. It is a true art form to be prepared to go on air, whether it's a podcast interview that's video or it's a national broadcast. I think that the rise of self-serve video on a platform like Socialive, which we're using right now, that has created the opportunity for everyone to be a little bit to lower that barrier to access to being, a well-produced function. But you can see what happens when you've got resources to invest in great video, great design team like you've got at Zuora, and I've worked with them. They're great people too. Beauty is what comes out the other end. It's a really fantastic, again, model to show when you invest in thought leadership and you do it in all the ways that translate to video, the output's phenomenal. And Daniel, what you guys are doing, it's simpler, right? Smaller team, great impact because you've got a great mission behind it and a great motivation. Anything to add, Daniel, to what Amy has shared?
No, I mean, I think sometimes, I guess the one thing I would add is sometimes it is worth it to spend a little bit of extra money on the thing that you want to really shine. Yes, you can be scrappy and with an internal team, but we've got a video on our homepage that is telling the story that we think resonates with a lot of both consumers and the consumer within the customer experience professional. And it's that we have basically all turned into Veruca Salt. This is kind of what we recognized as a company when we were talking to people. Gosh, we're all really impatient right now. We are all acting like Veruca Salt. And then we ran a poll internally. Do people know what we mean by when we're saying Veruca Salt? Is this just like, because I love musicals and movies, is this just like my own reference? And it turned out I wasn't alone. A lot of people knew what we were talking about when we said that. And so we went as far to license this music, because you have to do this. You have to license music, even if you're going to change parts about it. So we rewrote the lyrics, and we had kind of emotional connection with the song "I Want It Now," which is from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So absolutely think, and that was expensive. It was There was an expensive thing to do, and I had to kind of go to bat budget wise to say this is worth it. We're going to take a big swing at this, and it is paid many dividends.
I've seen the video. It's actually fantastic, and I'm so grateful that you bring up this point about going to bat for budget. Amy, you mentioned pipeline motion. I think that it's very clear and about what the value is behind these initiatives at Zuora. It's a company that believes in thought leadership, but I think a lot of marketers and anyone who's trying to pitch the idea of doing more video, they struggle with this getting buy-in challenge. And I actually posed this question to John. So now's a great time to bring in what he had to say. Let's hear John Miller of Demand Base's point of view around getting buy-in for more video.
Well, I think, let's focus on the value just of having a strong brand. And I think the best way I've found to describe it to, executives is in the concept of just headwinds or tailwinds. Most companies, you ask them like, hey, are you generating enough pipeline? Are you growing as fast as you want? Most of the time, the answer is going to be like, oh, of course not. We want to grow faster. We wish we had more pipeline, and then, well, why? Our conversion rate here is not so great. We don't have enough of these, blah, blah, blah. Well, why? And if you kind of dig into it enough times, usually it's just something is harder than it should be. You just wish it was just a little easier to generate, to convert more MQLs into SQLs, or more MQAs into opportunities, or just something your deal win rates, you just wish it were a little easier. Well, what is it that makes all these things a little easier? It's your brand, and if your brand is not helping you, it's a headwind. And it just therefore it's a little bit of a drag on everything else you're doing. And if you've got a tailwind where your brand is actually supporting you, it's a little bit of push, a little bit of lift on everything else that you're doing. And I think people get the analogy, and so if you can kind of get exactly like, wouldn't we like to turn our headwind into a tailwind? Well, so, here are some things that are going to do it. that's the best sort of strategy I got.
John, are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready for the lightning round.
Okay, here we go. Dim the lights. Here we go. 3 do's and 3 don'ts about creating thought leadership video for C-suite executives.
So do work on a balance of both thought leadership and just traditional content. Don't forget that it's perfectly okay some of the time just to entertain your audience. Do bring third parties in, right? You were trying to build thought leadership aura around your business. That doesn't always have to come from your internal people. Sometimes just you get some benefit through association. And then do make sure your content gets distributed, not just created. It doesn't matter how good it is if nobody's actually seeing it or reading it. And so you have to spend as much time on distribution as you do on creation. Don't be self-promotional. And like this seems so obvious to so many people today, and yet even at demand-based still, like I have to fight back against like, why are we putting this article about us on our blog? And so trying to find get that right balance, and trust that if you are being educational or entertaining, that people will find the content about you. Don't go for quantity over quality. It gets back to the distribution piece. You don't want your gold to get somehow buried, just amongst a bunch of stuff that isn't all that great. And then lastly, this one's kind of pretty obvious, but don't be boring. Like it's okay to be a little interesting, a little unique, a little fun. People will really resonate. Just because this is B2B, it does not need to be boring.
Amen to that. And I think that I want to go back to what John said in the beginning of that clip about headwinds and tailwinds. I love that idea of momentum. And I think video is a beautiful way of creating the kind of momentum that is air cover for everything else you need to do. So I want to talk about impact. I want to talk about what the impact can be when we unlock having our C-suite truly be creators. And Amy, I'd love to kick that question to you. What is the impact on the business? You mentioned a bit about pipeline motions, but talk to me about how measurement really happens at Zuora around having the C-suite be so active on camera.
Absolutely. And this is something I've been so methodical about since joining Zuora, because in my previous role, I measured everything I did as an industry analyst. And then I moved into an organization where I was part of the go-to-market motion, and I felt really uncomfortable not having specific and demonstrable KPIs back to the business. So pipeline creation was a really obvious one because we're able to create campaigns around almost everything we do at the Institute, whether it's an event or a piece of content. And we track that and report that back to the business. We look at engagement levels. We look at, of those 1,500 executives, who of them have been active in the last year, which one of those are from target accounts. And so we can go back and say, look, we're drawing an audience that's really meaningful audience to speak to for Zuora. And then I mentioned we have a strategy team of advisors that is an advisory arm of the Institute, because that team is working one-on-one with companies that are often represent sales opportunities for us. We also track ACV or average or annual contract value associated with the engagements that my team is involved with. Ultimately, we're a software company that sells software. And so everything that we do needs to support someone's decision to go with Zuora over doing nothing or going with a competitive product. And so we want to tie our success really closely to the business's success, because that will enable us to continue to receive investments from the business.
Right. And I love this in a B2B world too, because words like velocity matter, right? When we're talking about long deal cycles, engagement matters. We're talking about more than one buyer. This is really something every B2B firm has to deal with and hopefully is measuring. But video plays such a role at pretty much every stage of that customer life cycle. And you've clearly extended it beyond just top funnel, beyond just early stage awareness. I got to give you a ton of credit for that. That's wonderful. Really, kudos on building out such a robust program there.
Absolutely.
And Daniel, tell me about the impact video has on your business. We talked about kind of high level things about making, employees and customers, both as potential audiences for our C-suite, more engaged, more trustworthy. Tell me about how you visualize the impact video has on a company of your size.
Yeah, so I mean, at early stage companies, momentum is incredibly important. There's perceived momentum in the market amongst, early adopters as well as analyst firms about new players and disruptors. And also for your future employees, to see that you are a company that is different, that is standing out, that is cool. You have to have this kind of emotional resonance, I think, with your audience, and that audience includes all of those constituents. I think in order to build that type of momentum, and be seen by people as magnetic. I want to be a part of this. I don't know at all what you guys do, but I like you. I mean, this is a fundamental, this liking principle, right? This is psychology that we're talking about now, is foundational. And I love Simon Sinek, and there's a bunch of different interesting people that talk so much about how connecting at the emotional level is actually why people buy. And then they justify the purchase with the right side of their brain to their boss so that they don't get fired using numbers. And in some ways, I want to market like that as well. I want to create a structure, because I also am an Excel spreadsheet dork, and did consulting as my first job out of college, and totally know how to kind of use numbers to make sure we don't run out of money, right? But also, it's my job to make sure that we are actually connecting with buyers. So I mean, video is incredibly important part of doing that, and getting that exposure, whether it's through videos that are on our site, videos that exist through other people's webinars, replays that are then happening, video snippets that we're sending out in emails. A lot of this stuff is kind of hard to track especially if you're using a first touch attribution model, which is what I've used predominantly in early stage companies, because it's easiest of attribution models. Right. And so it can just become challenging to say, well, we spent, 20 grand on doing that thing. What did we get from that? And it's hard sometimes to say, well, I can give you a straight line drawing it into the pipeline. But, having now done this enough times, and the anecdotal evidence that you get back, and I'm so grateful for things like Gong, actually, which allow us to hear snippets that people are saying and get shout outs, but also there is some kind of, at least it's not attribution that we're tracking per se, in the sense of we see it in our actual conversion rates, but it's like the internal recognition attribution. So, hey, this sales call happened, and the sales rep tags, hey, marketing, shout out from this prospect. They took this meeting because they were looking at 60 different vendors and went through their homepages and looked at everybody, and we stood out. And that's what that person said to us in this video, unprompted. That little clip, the CEO sees that and says, now I see the value of marketing. The marketing team sees that and says, oh my gosh, it's working, because sometimes it's hard to know. It's hard to know when you put stuff out there. So never underestimate some of the emotional resonance of doing video in particular.
Right. I'm so glad you said the phrase perceived momentum, because perception is everything, especially for an early stage startup. You're battling against a lack of awareness and trust. Video is such a beautiful way of creating both. And I do think it's one of those low-hanging fruits that more startups, I think more small companies should embrace, because it humanizes the C-suite. And hey, how great does it feel when somebody who's got a C-level title is in a video and you've got anecdotes to point back to that being revenue driving? I think that's like a fast track to getting more budget for it, right? When someone in the C-suite is in it. And speaking of perceived momentum, I'd love to throw play another clip from John, because what he talks about is exactly related to this, Daniel, about this idea that brand is essential to building trust. So let's play this answer from John.
Well, I mean, very clearly, I believe that content and thought leadership is how B2B companies should build their brands. Period. Stop. And we can get into more about the psychology behind that. But I do think it's super duper essential. Just a second ago, branding in B2B just in general, I think first of all, brands matter in B2B, right? There's some people who will say stuff like, well, it's all very rational, enterprise decision making, and like there's more than enough research to say that that's bogus. You know, B2B decisions are complex, which means, you know, when humans are confronted with complex decision making, they use heuristics to simplify it. And there's just so much psychological research that says emotions are heavily involved in heuristic forming, and, you know, brands work on the emotional level. So, you know, fundamentally what we're talking about here is finding an emotional connection with our buyers, you know, to help them so that when they're making these decisions that may seem rational but are actually guided by heuristics, they're kind of in our favor. And, you know, it's funny because then there's lots of emotions that can spin around and be at play. In consumer marketing, oftentimes we do lean into kind of aspirational emotions, you know, positive feelings when you kind of buy this product or use this product. B2B has this interesting asymmetry where, you know, a good B2B purchase makes your company better off. A bad B2B purchase, you can lose your job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the dominant emotions that ends up playing a role in B2B tends to be fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so as a brand, how do you counteract all those things? Well, it's trust. You know, trust is the antithesis to fear, uncertainty, and doubt. How do you build trust? Well, you can build trust by forming a human connection, which as you're saying, video is an important part of. You can build trust by being seen as an expert because people trust experts. You know, you can build trust by social proof, and video can be a really powerful way to bring social proof, you know, to the table. So there's, I think, a lot of factors that play, but the underlying theme to all of this is just trust. I do want to re-emphasize just for a second, though, like that this emotional impact here happens subconsciously, much more than consciously. You know, and, you know, our buyers may think they're actually making rational decisions, right? But they are actually being guided by these emotions that are at play. And that's why sort of branding is both so powerful, but also sort of so subtle in terms of kind of its impact on all this.
Oh, it's so true, isn't it? Amy, I'd love to just hear any response you have to what John was sharing, especially about this idea of humans and how we make decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, we are, our company in particular, and probably a lot of folks listening, we're at the end of the day, we're selling relationships. Daniel, you said something similar that really resonated with me. It's like, is this a company that I like? Like, do I want to do business with this company? Are these likable people? And I think that's really incredibly important. At the end of the day, that's what we're selling. Do you want to come on a journey with us? And before you make any decision about going on a journey with anyone, one of the first questions you ask is, you know, is this someone that I could ride cross country with? You know, could I sit in a car with them on a road trip? Or, you know, is this someone that I want to keep at arm's length? And if that's the case, then they're probably not someone you want to do business with. So we really strive in a lot of our work, first of all, to be, you know, super focused on the customer and what the outcome that they're trying to achieve, which is frankly the whole reason we have the Institute, is to help people run successful subscription businesses. And then I think second, you know, it's not, we try to be likable because everyone is who they are. You know, some people are more extroverted, some people are more introverted, some people come across differently, but it's to be genuine and who we are, and to, you know, create an environment where people can be the best people, the best versions of themselves that they can be at work. And, you know, a belief that if we create that environment, that's going to really come across. And we've been really successful doing that. It's been a core part of our culture, and has attracted some really incredible, not only executives, but people, and, you know, more broadly, to Zora, that you want to hang out with, and that you want to go on a journey with. And so I think that piece, it's all part of this. Right. And it really can't be stated too little.
Right. And I love the difference between what I think John mentioned is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which a lot of B2B does drive, especially in world like risk, you know, whether financial or security or IT. There's a lot of FUD, right, that's used to drive that urgency in marketing. But you're right, this is a long term, especially if it's a transformational software that you're expecting a years and years long relationship with somebody. You want to build something that's based less on fear, more on inspiration and hope and guidance for a better path forward. That's not easy to do, but video does break down that wall. And thank you for making the point about people being who they are. That is the beauty of video, is it really does let personalities, or lack thereof, shine through. Daniel, anything quickly to add before we move to our do's and don'ts lightning round?
Let's do it.
Hey, good. Well done on that segue. And we're going to start right with you, Daniel. Give me 3 do's, 3 don'ts for C-suite on video in any capacity.
All right. Do tell stories that connect emotionally. Do go bigger than you think is safe. And lastly, we've been talking a lot about this, but do be yourself, be your authentic self, because I think that it resonates with people.
Tell me more about the bigger than you think is safe real quick.
So I think that there is a gravitational pull within many organizations if you crowdsource amongst the whole C-suite what you should be doing for your brand and for your brand voice. Like, because what happens is a bunch of people have a bunch of different ideas, and then the CMO has to play referee and compromise. And compromise, I think, is the death knell to a brand being able to stand out. So you have to, I think, take buy-in, and then you have to go big. And you have to be able to live with the consequences of what going big means. But I think that there's a lot of like kind of safe out there, and you kind of see it as you click around websites or look at different types of content people are putting out. And then there is stuff that is obviously different. And so that's what I'm encouraging.
And you got to go big to get there. Give us your 3 don'ts, please.
Don't expect big audience engagement on day one, and also don't let that deter you from keep going. 2, I'd say don't sound corporate, right? Like people want to hear you speak to them as you would speak to a friend or somebody kind of outside of a business context. So just say the words just like you normally would say the words. And lastly, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but don't sell your product. People have a very skin crawling, visceral reaction to feeling overtly sold to. But people also want to buy. People buy things all the time. So allow the emotional connection that you're having with people to be the thing that sells it rather than just telling them about your product itself.
Fantastic advice. Amy, your turn, my love. The lightning round. 3 do's, 3 don'ts for C-suites on video.
Number 1 is know your audience and be audience first. Number 2, and this is something that was said earlier, which is you have to have a distribution mechanism. So it's not enough to just create the content. Make sure you've got a good distribution mechanism for whatever it is you're creating, or no one will be able to see it. And then the last thing is really do be mission driven. Why are we creating this? Well, we're creating this because this aligns with our mission. So those are my 3 do's. My 3 don'ts, and this is one around alignment as well. Don't get misaligned. Sometimes you can find this super interesting topic that one executive is super excited about sharing, but it doesn't exactly align with the rest of your motions. And then it's not going to get distributed. It's going to seem one-off, and you're just not going to get the traction from an audience perspective or from any other way that you're really looking for. I mean, there's something to be said. If someone's got a really strong point of view, there might be one way of getting that out the door, but just don't expect if things are misaligned that you're going to get as much bang for your buck, so to speak. Another one that you, Daniel, maybe mentioned the cringy topic. For me, it's super cringy if you expect your execs to do a stand-up comedy routine. So don't try to take someone who's not comfortable telling jokes and put them in a position where they've got to like their timing is going to be off. Everyone's going to feel bad for them. I've seen it happen multiple times. So just know who you're dealing with. And again, if you've got someone behind the scenes creating their script, just make sure it's in line with who they are and what they're going to be really what's going to be genuine. And then the last one in video is so great about this because in many cases it's pre-recorded. Don't say too much. So back in the old days when you put an exec up on stage, even if they had a script, 9 times out of 10, they tell this story, they tell that story, and suddenly your keynote is 30, 40, 1 hour over. With video, you have to be shorter and more concise because typically you've got a smaller amount of time to tell your story. That's really good for the audience. So it forces you to go through the exercise of what is it that we really have to say and what's the point that we can get across in a shorter time than we would normally be on stage talking.
Absolutely. These are great. I'm immensely taking notes from both of you. This is just fantastic advice. And if you let me, I'd love to share my own as well. I think that this is a really exciting world of virtual event production, yes, but working with C-suite executives especially. Former PR girl here, written a lot of speeches, done a lot of prep work, and it's fun. It can be really fun to turn people who don't think they're good on camera and turn them into people who are good on camera, because everyone can be. I do believe that actually deep down, that not everyone is talent, right, that you put on every stage, but everybody can kill it when they get out there. And so number one don't for me is don't skip that prep work. I don't care how charismatic someone is in a sales meeting. When that camera turns on, sometimes they turn into somebody else. It is a human reaction. So that prep work helps them feel comfortable. It also means prepping the questions accordingly. Like to Amy's point, don't give them a comedy routine. Let them shine. Let them tell the stories and the anecdotes and the facts that align to them. It's going to create a much more authentic personality when it does actually shine through. I love this. We've mentioned it many times today, but don't try to be all things to all people. Your C-suite executives are ideal for speaking on something, some opportunities and some stages, not ideal for others. Don't be afraid to reach into and within the bench strength. Maybe you'll be like Daniel and you can give people their very first opportunity and you'll find a superstar, but it does take a judicial eye to say, is this person the right one to give this message on this platform at this time? Where can we start to build a bench strength of speakers? And I finally, my last don't lose sight of the attendee experience. We think so much about what we want to say. What is it that we want the audience to feel? I feel like this is such cliche advice, but it is so lost, especially in an age of virtual. What is it that we want the audience to come away with? What do we want them to feel? Is it that sense of hope? Is it that sense of possibility and optimism? Or is it that fear, uncertainty, doubt, and worse, boredom? We want them to want more to do with us, and it's like a good date. If it's a second date, you got to earn it. You got to make them want more. So I'm going to leave you with just my don'ts. Forget the do's. But I will say this: do, my panelists, give us any final thoughts you have for our audience. Daniel, anything else you want to add, and any final words today?
I mean, take the leap. It's like I think there's so many people that get in their heads about this. I really do. I think that there is an unnecessarily high bar in people's heads about what they have to be able to do in order to put themselves out there and have people find what they're saying interesting. I see whether it's because of the, patriarchy that we have and misogynism, like some of the women on my team I've seen in the past feel like imposter syndrome, like you're a freaking expert, like this is society's problem and now we need to do things to correct it. So just take the leap.
How about you, Amy? Any final thoughts for the audience?
Those were great thoughts, Daniel, and turning them through in my head. I think, just go ahead and do it. And I think, always starting with the audience and what would you want to see, experience, feel, do? And that just starting with that and everything after that. You mentioned preparation, Katie. It's an exciting time. We've been forced to have to innovate really quickly in an area of video, maybe more so than we would have otherwise. I know for our organization, we used a lot of the in-person presentations as a crutch because we were pretty good at it. We didn't do a lot of video and we've really had to up our game there. And I'm really glad that we have, because it's a great way of communicating.
It's also a great way of doing all the things that we hope our marketing does: build empathy or trust with the business, show our empathy as an organization, show off the thought leaders like you two who exist in every organization, if we're willing to do the work to really give them platforms to shine. I can't thank you both enough for being part of this. I want to thank John Miller, wherever he is, for being part of this as well. It's a really exciting time, as you pointed out, but it's also fraught with plenty that can go wrong. So thank you for helping us avoid some of those mishaps. And listen, this brings to a close our second episode of the Creator Economy series. Join us on February 17th for our next episode on authentic storytelling. I'm so happy, Amy, Daniel, that you could join me today. Thank you. And I hope that we've inspired our audience to get out there, get filming, because trust me, it is worth it. It is worth it, my friends. Thank you, everyone. Good luck out there.